So we're early in the new season of the Rising Leader podcast, and as you heard in the introduction and my first episode, what we're trying to do is go kind of underneath leadership, go underneath success, back basically go underneath all the things that we are kind of running really hard about life with, and see if we can find some grounding, some centering. I say that all the time. How do we get grounded and centered with what's coming here in 2025? Whether you think it's good or bad or indifferent, I do think there's a lot of change coming. And I know my clients are feeling it. I hear from people that they're feeling it. And I want to bring people who help me find that grounding, find that inner place where I can be okay with whatever's happening. So I've invited some of my absolute favorite people to be part of these conversations, and I follow my next guest. I've known him for quite a few years, hugged him maybe twice, have a little bit of similar backgrounds, but basically wait for him to post, wait for him to put a video out, wait for him to put some little bit of wisdom out, because he gives me comfort in small little doses. And besides having the best podcast voice I've ever heard, for so it's going to make me sound like Fran Drescher when he finally gets to talk. Uh, Michael McDonald is one of my favorite people to bring to you to see how can we take our leadership, how can we take our businesses and our family life and be the best we can be in all these situations. Officially, Michael McDonald is a transformational coach for entrepreneurs and executives, working with CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs, and mentoring other coaches around the world. With a style described as part Mr. Rogers, part Inception, I know more Inception than Mr. Rogers about Michael. He helps high performers find effortless inspiration and simplicity in everything they're up to, great and small. Something awesome is trying to happen, and your job is to allow it. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so I just told everybody that you're here for them, but you're actually here for me, because that's what you do for me. Like, I just your presence in the world does something for me that I hope I can do for other people, and I think we all need. Can you just talk a little bit about, like, tell me what your philosophy of coaching and why you do what you do?
Philosophy of coaching. And it's evolved over the years. So let's see what comes out of my mouth when I talk about it. It's it's evolved from an earlier years of coaching for me was helping people do things, add things, get better at things, like working the learning curves, developing skills, intentionally changing, very much the territory of empowerment. What can I do about this? How can I better myself? Over the last, like it started maybe 10 years ago, but especially over the last 4 or 5 years for me within coaching, it's actually shifted to be something much more subtractive because I've seen over time more and more clearly the fundamental well-being within people, seeing the potential that's already in there. And instead of trying to add more to people's plates, because I often work with people who are incredibly busy
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to avoid coaching. They're like, I don't have time to get even have a coaching call because I'm too busy. It's like, oh, that's why you need a coaching call. It's actually what's all the stuff that you're doing that's getting in the way instead of what can I do? For example, your question, like this inquiry about grounding, which is very much my world, instead of what can I do to become more grounded, what are you currently doing that you don't even know that you're doing that's getting in the way? Because grounding is our very nature, that feeling of stability, that access to knowing, that like the ease in making decisions, it's all right there. And actually, we just have a lot of autopilot thinking and behavior that's getting in the way of that. So more and more of my work has been to help people let go of the things that they didn't even know that they were doing, get out of their own way rather than adding a bunch more stuff to their plate. So,
It took me years of personal development and contemplation to actually see some of the chaos I was causing for myself. And I'm talking about the obvious stuff, but then the subtler stuff of how I made my life and my inner world more complicated than it really is. So the people that you coach, the people that I coach, have really busy lives. I call them greedy jobs. They pay a lot and they ask a lot.
mm.
So of course my life is chaotic. That's the price of admission. How do you help people start to see, to slow down enough to understand where they're doing, hitting themselves with the rake?
One of the first distinctions that I often share with people is the difference between overwhelm and overload.
Mm.
Because most people who are really busy and kind of freaking out, they see those as equivalent. And what I mean is overload is the logistical reality of it. It's like, oh, I don't have enough time for this. Or like, oh, if I write this check, it will bounce. It's, but it's purely logistical. It's just a thing. Um, Overwhelm is the feeling.
Mhm.
Overwhelm is the, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, there's not enough or there's too much. Overwhelm is actually the feeling you get when you're trying to think about more than one thing at a time.
Mm.
Overwhelm is the feeling of overthinking, independent of circumstances. Because I know plenty of people where they have no overload. They're completely fine. They're wealthy. There's not much to do, and they're freaking out. They're just sitting there scaring themselves. They're overwhelming themselves, and they have stories of like, oh, not enough or too much.
Or
And
if I don't do this, then that.
yeah, and if you had a camera crew, you just see someone just sitting there. But if you hook up a EEG machine to them, it's like, oh my God, this person is clearly being tortured. The thing is, they're torturing themselves with their thinking. And overload, there's plenty of people where it's like, oh, there's just isn't enough time for that. It's like, oh, well, there isn't enough money for that. Like, oh, sometimes like, oh, I guess this business is just closing. It's like, oh, I guess this change is happening. It doesn't have to feel bad.
Mm.
The feeling bad is something that we add to it, that we don't realize that we're adding to it. We create scary stories about what's going on. We project scary stories onto these very neutral
Let me slow
circumstances.
you down right there, because I when you were like, I was going to ask the question, what if it's something that's really scary? Can it still not be bad? Can it still not feel bad? And then you just said 99% of the time we make up scary stories about it.
Mhm. Yeah, nothing outside of us is scary. Nothing outside of us can be scary.
Convince me of that.
Uh, like, what's an example of something outside of you that you think is scary?
All right, well, let's just talk about what we talked before the mic goes on. I'm having chest pains today,
Hmm.
and we have medical technology that says I have a blockage in my heart, right? So I had chest pains today, and I started writing down all the count numbers and passwords for my kids, right? So that's
Uh-huh.
scary. Now,
Hmm.
I know what to do with that myself because I've done this work, but so let's say I'm just freaked out. Like, am I going to make it through the day? This
Yeah,
is
so
scary. This is truly scary.
yeah, so bringing like really fine attention to what's actually going on in this like recent time frame. So a minute ago, when I was sharing about stuff like scary stories, you were starting to get excited. Did you feel scared a minute ago?
No.
Do you feel a little scared now?
Yes, because I don't know where I just sent this conversation.
Are you feeling the chest pains right now?
No.
Yeah. If the chest pains were causing fear, like how could you be afraid without the chest pains?
Right.
And even when you're experiencing them, you have to make up the story. And it might be really useful to make up the story, by the way. I'm not
Mhm.
saying like like that you shouldn't feel fear. That probably would be the survival of the species would immediately stop. But knowing the nature of what's going on. Because if you really are present, like if you're completely present with something, you can't actually feel fear. If you're really present just with a sensation of a chest pain, like
And
that's
why
just awareness.
why is that? Like again, what
Mhm.
like we're again, the people who we work with and the people who are listening to us now are like going, wait a second, chest pains
Yeah.
are real. Like what like that's something to take stock of.
Hmm.
Why is it why if you're present don't you feel fear?
The fear requires thinking about the future and creating a story about the future. And it requires creating a scary story about the future. And one of the fears people have of not feeling fear, ironically, like there's okay, there's a scary feeling, but the idea of not feeling that they have a scary story about as well. They think that, oh, well, if I'm not afraid when I have chest pains, I won't do anything about it.
Mhm. That's true.
We, yeah, yeah, I call it the scary exit. Like the scary stories that we live inside of. We're in this like really uncomfortable room, and there is an exit door to the room, but on that exit door is another scary story that you're going to be either like lazy or
Mhm.
bad or something terrible is going to happen if I'm not feeling this, if I'm not in this story that I'm in, then clearly something worse is going to happen.
True. I
And
used to feel I used to think that if I didn't worry, it meant I didn't care.
mhm,
That was an equation I had. Let's go back to this. Let's go back. So we'll go back to the chest pains, because the two things that scared me wasn't dying. It wasn't dying. It was that my kids would not have the information they needed, and they'd have to go through the shit I went through when my loved ones died and didn't have any information. So I was like, I got to fix that at
uh,
3 o'clock in the morning. And the second thing was I didn't want to be infirmed. So I made up a story that if I have a heart attack, I will be infirmed. And that's what scared me. So I was in my head about those two things.
yeah, like you created an experience of being infirmed.
But so that's what you're saying is the chest pains themselves aren't scary. It's
Mhm.
what I wrapped it all up in that's scary.
Yeah. I remember Steve Chandler in one of his books, there's probably right now, he had a chapter that zoomed in on this as well, where he described if he was in the middle of being attacked by a bear, Steve Chandler, of course, wild examples, realizing, oh, if I was actually in the moment, I wouldn't be afraid. If I was afraid, oh, I might die or what's going to go on or how do I, like, yeah, like if I'm a fraction of a second into the future, I might be afraid.
Mhm.
Or if I'm like a bit in the past, there might be other stuff going on, oh, I shouldn't have. How did I get into this? How do I not do this in the future? But if you're really present, like if you're in an actual emergency, you're already in action. If the house is on fire and you're leaving the house, you're not actually afraid. You're alive, you're engaged. Your nervous system is activated, but you're not actually having that fear or stress kind of experience.
Mhm.
And we confuse that because in some ways that part of like that activated nervous system is being co-opted when we have scary stories. And for almost all of us, we're not actually in physical danger, but that part of our nervous system gets lit up as if we're in physical danger all the time from our thinking. And we don't know that it's our stories that's creating that. We think that it's the world that's creating that. We think that the circumstances are freaking us out, where really it's the story that we're telling about our circumstances that freaks us out.
And it happens so lightning fast that there's no separation in there, right?
Hmm.
It's not even cause and effect. It's one thing. So my guess is one of the things that you teach your clients is how to make that separation. first
Hmm.
to see it. So let's take being, doing a, you're in near Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. Let's say one of your entrepreneurs is going for uh, uh, to do a presentation for venture capital or in their boardroom or something like that. How do you teach them now? Because that's a terrifying thing.
Yeah, it'd be similar to how I talked about the chest pains. Um, how could they be terrified as they're talking about it with me when they're just man in room on Zoom or woman on in room talking on the phone with me? Like I point out, it's not actually happening. I remember having a client here. We did an immersion in person, and he had a lot of stories about a past relationship. So it was like everything that we were talking about, it was all about this woman who is no longer with. And I asked him, like, is she actually here in the room? Like, I don't see her. Like, are you seeing an entity that I'm not seeing? How could she be causing what you're experiencing right now? What is the mechanism by which this other person who's not here, you have no idea what's going on for them. You have no idea, like, are they casting a spell from long distance and it's affecting you right now? But actually, like helping people get suspicious about that connection that they have between something out there, something in their memory or in their imagination, and what they're experiencing. Helping people get suspicious about this outside in way of viewing the world and their
Hmm.
experience.
So what,
Like,
what kind of practices do you teach people?
um, it varies per person. I usually don't teach many practices. I mostly teach awareness. I'll often give homework assignments.
That's
So
that's
that,
what I mean. What
yeah,
what do you
usually
have them
just,
go do when
yeah,
they're not talking to you and
yeah,
being calmed by that
usually just
wonderful
for like
voice?
a week or so. Like try various things. Like there's a lot of people, it's like, yeah, you'd probably benefit from meditation. If you can't do 10 minutes, do 1 minute a day. If you can't do 1 minute a day, do one mindful breath per day. Do it consistently. That tends to help settle things down, help people create more space around their thinking. So meditation is one of the blanket ones. If they're not able to meditate, they should probably meditate. But if they're really good at meditation, it might not matter so much anymore. Um, an exercise that I've often given to people is an exercise I call cozy chair. And how it works is sit down in a cozy chair somewhere and there's nothing to achieve, there's nothing to do, but you just sit there until you have an authentic impulse to do something. Like there's actually something that you want to do. So then you get up and you start doing that. Like you go in that direction, you start that activity. And as soon as you can tell that you're no longer present in your activity, it's become an idea or it's become a should, or you've gotten distracted and you've started thinking about something else, then you stop doing or not doing whatever. You look around for the nearest equivalent for a cozy chair and you sit back down in it, waiting for that next impulse. And this is actually a way of training a discernment, which is key for the direction that I point in, being able to tell the difference between like authentic intuitive wisdom in the moment, your knowing. It's like, oh, I want to do this, or knowing your internal yes or no. This is key for making decisions as well. And being able to discern between that and thinking, going into the conceptual mind, going into the shoulds, going into the memory, going into imagination, and not actually being present in your life, not actually connected with what you're doing. So it starts exercising that. Initially, it's just so subtle, being able to tell the difference between these. Like, I don't know if this is a knowing or if this is thinking. I'm not sure if this is a reaction or something that I should be following. But just knowing that there is a difference between those and practicing in a fine, very relaxed container, which is which, that starts becoming night and day. I think one of the problems that a lot of the world has, and especially in any of the territories which is overly mental, so people who are in tech, people who are in engineering, people who are surrounded by a lot of business culture, they tend to have their internal lie detectors turned off. They've lost touch with their inner knowing. It's all about their ideas, their concepts, and it's their concepts are just at war with each other. And there's an inner knowing that there's like a signal deep down, hidden, quiet, that they've lost touch with and they don't even believe is there anymore.
Mhm.
And most of the empowerment world is about creating a stronger concept to overpower some of the lesser concepts. A lot of my work is helping people quiet down all concepts so they can get access to this knowing. And it turns out the knowing, not only is it wisdom, not only is it something that's beyond your psychology, it takes everything that you know into account. Like part of that scary exit that people have is that, well, if I just trust my intuition doesn't know the things that I know. My intuition is an idiot, is what most people think. But it turns out when you actually drop all concept and you tap into just knowing, that knowing takes into account all of your expertise. It takes into account all the things that you've subconsciously noticed.
Mm.
It takes into account everything from your past. It takes into account all the things that are like likely futures. And it seems to take into account a lot of things that you couldn't possibly physically know. And yet you have a knowing. So that's the superpower that everyone has that almost no one is using and almost no one believes exists just because they're thinking too much and their thinking is getting in the way of it.
And they're also relying on what their remembered experiences are. Oh, it's funny that you're describing what happened with me and Rich Litvin, our mutual friend and my former coach, when I wrote only tens. He said to me one day, he says, Mark, I was talking about my ADD and being an entrepreneur for the first time in my life, and I just couldn't put two thoughts together. And he said, Mark, what if you trusted yourself to do the right things? And I just said to him, I'd be fucking under a bridge, homeless. My kids would starve. Like, are you kidding me? If I don't beat myself into submission every day to get things done, like, and he's like, how's that working out for you? And then we talked about that. I remember the Michael Neal thing. Sit on the couch, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and sit on the couch, and you're sitting on the couch. He says, and you don't know until you know, and when you know, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, so I decided I was going to not do anything I didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was just not going to do anything I didn't want to do for a week. And I was just going to only do the things that absolutely had to be done, therefore 10, right? Or that I really felt like I wanted to do. And I was going to, what happened that week was I found that voice that you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about of, oh, every single thing in my life is a should, everything is a fear, everything is an automatic, everything in my life. And I wrote the whole freaking book out of just that practice that you talked about. Going,
Mm-hmm.
can you discern the difference between that automatic and what's authentically and and you use the word deep mind versus the conceptual mind. Can you explain that?
Yeah, there's two different orientations that we can have in using our mind. Uh, Either in the orientation of deep mind or conceptual mind. And I'm a huge fan of the work of Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the hemispheric hypothesis. So mapping this over to the
You
brain
just jetted
chemistry.
way over my head, so go on.
Yeah, it deserves some explanation. So there's some grounding in how the two hemispheres of the brain actually operate, the left and right brain. And so back, I forget, it's like 70s, 80s. For a while, there's some pop psychology about left brain is for this kind of activity, right brain is for this kind of activity. It turns out once they had better measurement that that wasn't actually true. They hooked up EEG machines to people and realized like actually both of them are being used. Let's not talk about the hemispheres now. Ian McGilchrist went back to that work and noticed, well, there's clearly two very physically separate lobes of the brain with a little bit of connection in between. So what actually is going on? So he fleshed out that what's going on for the left and the right brain is it's like you've got two different personalities. It's like instead of being a single person, you're kind of a couple. Like there's a couple in there. And they've got two different views on the world. One is more detail oriented, one is more logical and putting the like everything together linearly, and one is more expansive, receptive, and intuitive. And Ian McGilchrist found that there is a natural hierarchy between them. Instead of there being sort of this, I mean, it's if you're trying to be democratic with two people, it's there isn't really a majority. Uh, the right brain is actually supposed to be in charge for a healthy human being, where who we actually are, our center of identity, is actually this spacious, intuitive, receptive, wise, big picture place. That's actually where we make decisions from, is from the right brain. Like if people have a stroke in the right brain, they just have the left brain. They're able to think things out very logically, but they cannot make decisions. He
Mm.
talked about this in some of the research. Like you can reason everything, but you just can't make decisions. And you can see this. I see this everywhere in my clients initially. Um, they're they're caught in the left brain. So the deep mind is where the right brain is in charge and uses the left brain like a trusted advisor. Ian Gilchrist's first book is called The Master and His Emissary, using that metaphor, where the right brain is the master and the left brain is the emissary. And in that story of the master and the emissary takes over. The emissary, like the thing about the left brain is it thinks it's right. It's very righteous. It's very logical. It thinks that it should be in charge. It's like the CTO or the engineer thinks that it should be in charge of the company and starts co-opting the CEO. And it's really unhealthy and it's also really common. It's a it starts to explain everything that's going wrong in the world. It starts to explain everything that's going wrong within people's thinking. It's why we don't have connection to wisdom. It's why we don't have connection to well-being, because everyone's in this other orientation of the mind, the conceptual orientation of the mind, where the left brain has taken over, where you think that you are your thoughts. You think that whatever you're thinking is true. And you're just building more and more your map of the world and trying to exert will on the world. Like if it doesn't match up, you've got your map in the world. Clearly the world is wrong, and you need to go change the world so that it matches your map. And we become these very dysfunctional, very separate, very egoic, just clusters of thinking. And we've forgotten who we actually are, which is this intelligent space. And so we've got all these thoughts competing with each other. You'll see it in real time on social media. There's just all these thoughts being believed that are competing with each other.
Mm. I'm 100%. And but again, when we talk like that, and when I talk like that,
Mhm.
the terror that comes with separating, because there is a when you start to realize that your thoughts may not be right, that you
Uh-huh.
can't trust your perceptions completely. You can't trust the structure of Mark J. Silverman, who I built. And even worse, when you actually find out that Mark J. Silverman is just a completely made up thing,
Mhm.
that there's a reason we cling to it. There's a reason we built it in the first place. There's a reason we cling to it. And what we don't know is it's that metaphor of hanging from a ledge and and the ground is 2 inches below us. We hold
Mhm.
on to our thoughts and our beliefs and our being right and all that stuff, not knowing that freedom is 3 inches,
Mhm.
below, if we just let go of all that. So, you and I are talking like this. Most people won't believe until they hit ground that it's there for them.
Yeah, and I kind of go back and forth, like, because I'll talk about this stuff. I don't actually expect people to believe me. But if they get suspicious and if they have a good feeling when we're hanging out, it's like, well, that sounds terrifying or that sounds complete like I don't believe it, but there's something nice. Like there's a good feeling. That's part of it. Um, I also have learned when
I
I'm
think it's I think it's why I think it's why you're effective as a coach. I think it's why I'm effective as a coach, because I think there needs to be a trust in the person who's guiding you towards that, that they've seen it, they wouldn't drive you off a cliff, and that it gives you an opportunity to maybe consider it.
Mhm,
It's what I was, I read I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj a lot.
mhm,
And if people who don't know what that is, it's a very, very deep spiritual text that it took me years to. Now I read it; it's total English. It took me years to read it, and in one of the passages, he's talking to someone who came to talk to him, and he was saying, "This is the way. This is the way to freedom. This is it." And the guy argues with him and he says, "You won't believe me. You can't believe me. My guru told me, I believed him, so I became self realized. You won't believe me. But can you believe that it's possible that I may see something that you don't see?" And that's why I think that's why you're so successful, because I believe you
mhm.
that there's something more that I don't know about, and that maybe my monkey mind isn't the be all end all.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I think this is originally from Mavis Karn. Like, can you can you imagine a color that you haven't seen before? And you can't imagine the color itself, but can you imagine that there is a color that you haven't seen before? Like it's knowing that it's possible to not know. It's making peace with not knowing and actually getting curious about not knowing rather than trying to fill in the space. Like if there's something that you don't know, you can go look up then. You can Google, you can chat GPT, whatever. Um, but not knowing what you don't know and make not both like peace with that and even an excitement at that, not knowing what you don't know, that starts to click you into that deep mind because our inner knowing doesn't come from memory. It doesn't come from logic. It's got that sense of either coming from deep within yourself or from the outside. It kind of arrives. It's why when we're spinning our wheels trying to figure something out, it's just not working, we'll go for a walk, we'll take a shower, we'll take a vacation, and then something occurs to us. You just have a thought, or something drops away, and you realize, oh, yeah, I don't need to think about that. Oh, yeah, that's not actually a problem. Okay, moving on. That's always available to us. And most of us only access that place when we hit rock bottom, when it gets so bad that we dramatically give up our conceptual self and have an ego death moment. And then we let a little bit of wisdom in.
Most of the time we have to be shattered to get that to come through. And so
Yeah.
my coach asked me to give up what I have to say is my last holdout. And it was the holdout that I've had for, I'm 62. I've had it for 50 years.
Mm,
And it was the deal I made with life. And she said, can you consider something different? And I was, no. Um, and it just made no sense to me in any world that this opposite thing would be true.
Mm,
And finally I did. And the most profound piece,
mm,
the thing I was holding on to for 50 years that I thought was the only thing keeping me together. Uh, and it was the key, right? So, like, what Michael's saying is absolutely true. I know it from my own experiences. Would you say the, kind of 101 class of this would be Byron Katie's The Work?
Uh, it's one of the paths to this. Um, I have the caveat as Byron Katie's school, which I did, I think in 2017. Just doing the work, just like reading Loving What is definitely transformational, is life-changing. Highly recommend that. To really get this, I'd recommend doing the school because there's a difference between the work as something to do, like as a prescription, as a technique or a methodology. Here's a way to inquire into your thinking. And when I first encountered it, it's like, oh, well, here's a way to get rid of limiting beliefs. It turns out it's
But there's a
not
lot of
that.
people that are right there. Like, they haven't even considered what we're talking about. And
Yeah,
for me, it was just the first inclination that something other than what I'm thinking could be true.
yeah, yeah. Actually, like, from that
I'm
perspective,
trying.
yes,
I'm trying to
totally
go. I'm trying to go
easier.
ground zero,
Hmm.
because again, the reason that I'm taking this shift for the podcast is, uh, I believe that we're all in a bit of fight or flight. I believe the United States has been that way since 9/11. There's just been a kind of undercurrent of fight or flight, and that's why a lot of this stridency and this division has started to really take root. COVID, I think, threw us into serious fight or flight. The elections and the vitriol in the political thing, I think we're all on edge. And when we're in fight or flight, I think it's really hard to access some of these grounding things. And
Hmm.
I think little tools uh, to help us just dial back the fear factor, the stress factor, so that we're not completely taken over by this.
Hmm.
Because, I'm practiced and I see a tweet and I can go off into my little world for a little while until I'm like, okay, let's dial this back. So that's why I'm saying I think
Yeah.
I think that most of us are not at our best these days,
Hmm.
and we need like just little stepping stones to get off this ride that we're on.
Yeah, and I have so many of them. So I also have the benefit of doing one-on-one coaching. So it's like, okay, what's the one for this person? So
Mhm.
it could be Byron Katie's The Work, her book, Loving What Is. It could be Steve Chandler's victim owner distinction in his book, Reinventing Yourself.
Mind blowing, right? Like,
That's a critical one. Um, Speaking of stress, uh, Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk about making stress your friend. That's a genius one. That actually has this insight as well of like, oh, it's like the the circumstances aren't the one that's creating this experience. It's your thinking about stress that creates this experience.
yeah, Michael Neal's "Why Aren't We Awesomer" was one of the first ones I would send to people. By the way, right,
Yes.
we're going to put these links in the show notes, so you can just click on all these things and get some of the goodness that Michael's talking about.
Hmm. You mentioned like Brian Johnson's work, so like Arte, Heroic.
Heroic,
Uh,
the cheapest PhD in new ways of thinking that you'll ever get.
yeah, it's a fire hose of personal empowerment and development.
It was so good when it was
It's
just 100 notes.
uh-huh. Then you try to keep up with them and realize that you can't
Mhm.
and probably shouldn't. But I still listen to a plus one every day as part of my morning routine.
Nice.
Uh, Yeah, there's probably other ones as well, but those are some of the top ones that come to
Those are
mind.
great. That's what I'm looking
Um,
for. Like, where can
and
people
also
just dip their
Ian
toe?
McGilchrist. That's because he's come up as for people who are really interested in neuroscience or more scientifically minded. Um, his pointer, his because his insight into the hemispheres, also as he like had the implications that became very much spiritual.
Mm,
So his work started with what's going on with these brains to like, oh, we've all got this backwards. So doing a YouTube search for some of his work could be helpful too.
beautiful. All right, now I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Okay.
What do you know that you think everybody needs to know? What's that thing that Michael McDonald knows that everybody just needs to know? If you died tomorrow, they just need to know this.
Or one thing. um, I'm choosing out of several things. It's that uh, that's over. It's in that quote that I have with my bio. Like something awesome is trying to happen, and your job is to allow it. That there is something in us. There's something that wants to be expressed through us, which isn't personal, but it gets a personal flavor to it. And life, instead of that sliding back into some sort of victim way of living, it's actually opening up into a higher way of living.
Mm,
It's opening up into this awakened way of living. Like it's in Shaw's quote, this is the true joy in life to be used for a purpose recognized as a mighty one, to being a force of nature. We all have that within us. And we can't conceptually grasp it, understand it, justify it. All we can do is start to feel it and allow it to start to come out. And as it starts to come out more and good things start happening, then we'll probably will start trusting it more. And that's when amazing things start happening.
I believe you. Michael Singer always talks about your nature is joy. Your nature is ecstatic. Your nature is, you know, God. And it's just dropping everything that's not it,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's that 2 inches from the ground when you're hanging. It's just letting go of all this stuff as you're saying, stop pushing a boulder up the hill. There's a there's an easier way. I love it. Uh,
Yeah, doesn't need to be hard.
it's just much more fun when it's hard. Uh, so, Michael, if people want more of you, where can they find you?
So my website is authenticintegrity.com. And you can email me at michael@authenticintegrity.com. So
Again, and the ADD guy in me just one. So, what's inauthentic integrity?
uh, trying to impress people.
So hilarious. Thank you. So also, I really suggest that you follow Michael on the social medias platforms. I will
Mhm.
put those links in there. Also, he just gives a little spot of wisdom every single day, and he's one of the few people I religiously, in quotes, make sure I follow and listen to every day. Michael, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. It's been a blast.
I love what you do. To everybody else,
Mm.
thank you for hanging with me. These conversations go from the very, very deep and mysterious to hopefully just practical and useful. All I want is for you to thrive, no matter what you're doing, all day, every day. You get to thrive. You get to enjoy this ride, no matter what it looks like outside. And I'm committed to helping you do that. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.